Go.
Coucou, bonsoir. My name is Hollywood Jade. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for choosing to be present in what I think is going to be a very influential and necessary and timely conversation. I am here on behalf of Pride Toronto, and I wanted to, before we get any further, take a quick second and recognize Dignity Network Canada for working with Pride Toronto to present this discussion. And in today's discussion, we'll be talking about Black solidarity, a transitional conversation on unity and decolonization. This panel will explore themes of Black, North, and South solidarity in relation to advocacy and Pride programming. We have a very distinct panel of guests and speakers who come from various locations around the world. And I'd like to take the time and introduce each of them personally. First, we have David Ikvo. We also have Joelle Sambi. We have Maria Fontanelle, and we have Carlos Idiboa. I would like to give you all an opportunity to individually introduce yourselves in more context and just let those of us who are listening and are here give us more context about who you are and what organization you represent. We can start with David.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm from South Africa. I'm a lawyer and currently a doctoral candidate for human rights, and I'm representing Pride Afrique. I'm a volunteer with Pride Afrique. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Joelle, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joelle Sambi. I am Belgo-Congolese. I live in Brussels, but I'm originally from Congo, Kinshasa. And I am an artist, a poet, also filmmaker. And I work in an organization that is called Euro-Central Asian Lesbian Community. And I am also part of the collective Belgium Network for Black Lives.
Joelle, I promise I'm gonna say it like that for the rest of this conversation. Maria, do you want to take it away?
Oh, yes, thank you so much. My name is Maria Fontanelle, and I am coming out of St. Lucia, which is in the Caribbean, specifically the Eastern Caribbean, but the Caribbean generally. I work with the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, ECAID. I also am a member of 758 Pride, which is a committee that organizes Pride celebrations in St. Lucia. And I'm so pleased and happy to be here.
Thank you. And Carlos?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Carlos Tozakala Idibo, and I'm calling from Côte d'Ivoire, my home country. And I'm the co-founder of Fierté Afrique Francophone. But I'm also a board member of Dignity Network. And it's very important to mention that because Dignity Network was literally born after the World Pride, the Human Rights Conference that took place in Toronto as part of World Pride in 2014. And it's been 6 years now, and the organization is all set with Doug Kay as a director. So we're grounded in Pride event. So it's really important to mention that background.
No, thank you for doing that. We all had gotten a chance to talk really briefly just about who we all are and what we all do. And one of the things that I found really interesting and powerful is that there's all of this advocacy that exists around the globe surrounding queerness and representation and the I'll even go as far as to say the celebration of Pride. And I guess what I want to know, I guess, Carlos, we can start with you, is what does the celebration of Pride mean to you?
To give a bit of background on that, I had a chance of growing up in France in a small town. And growing up, one of the things that I was really hoping that I could do or be involved in one day was Pride, because I was seeing that, even though I was living in a small town, but once in a while I was coming to Paris, and I got a chance to see like the big parade, and but at that time it wasn't that big, but it was still amazing for me. And I said to myself, one day I'm going to be part of that. But I wasn't sure like where around the world that's going to be. So Pride for me is more than a celebration. It's really, as I got involved in the activism work and community work, I clearly understood that it was a time that we needed to stop, to pause a little bit, and remember those who thought, so we can say that we have some rights. Our rights are recognized. It's also a celebration in terms of like, we did a lot of work. We came from very far. Having our rights didn't happen overnight. It's a result of fighting a lot and standing and speaking up to get our right recognized. So for me, that time, it's a lot of thinking, it's a lot of memories, it's a lot of recognition of all the work that folks are doing around the world. It's also about thinking of folks who don't have the opportunity to celebrate as we do in most Western countries, but they found a way to do that to also celebrate and come together, especially in most African countries.
Thank you. And see, I was hesitant to say the word celebration of Pride. Like, I think a more specific question would be, because your answer was perfect, but you mentioned that it's not always a celebration. So, Joelle, if I could ask you, listen, I'm obsessed. If I could ask you, what does Pride mean to you?
I mean, I have to give a little bit of context, because for me, I grew up in Kinshasa, Congo, and there is not such a thing as Pride, like a LGBTQI event where you all gather and just celebrate actually being together and who you are. And it took me quite a year until I moved in Brussels. Then I was able to attend Pride, and even though there I was always staying at the side, because it was a moment where, let's be honest and say it, there was a lot of white folks. There was not very much representation. I couldn't see, there was few people of color, few Black, lesbian, etc., etc. And it seems to me to be like something that I couldn't really fit in somewhere. Mm-hmm. But then slowly growing up, being more political, I also implicate myself in different organizations who were actually organizing the Pride, the Rainbow House. And also I was part of Massimadi, who's, and that's something I forgot to say in the beginning. I was part of Massimadi, which is like the festival for that screen movie on Black lives, actually, LGBTQI lives from Africa and around the world, all the Black community around the world, in Brussels, but also in Montreal, if I'm correct. So yeah, for me, it was, at the beginning, the Pride was like something, like a joyful moment, but I couldn't really fit in. And the more I got involved, the more I saw that, yes, it's actually a moment that I can make part of I can be part of the event. I can also shape that moment. I can also raise my voice and make sure that what is said, was it shared during that day, not only joy and happiness, etc., but it can also be like the joy and happiness of Black and colored folks, basically. So for me, it's a very important moment. Also because the more I go, the more we go, the more I can see how we interconnect with other countries, other community, Black communities, not only in Europe, not only in Belgium, in France, in let's say, French-speaking countries, but also in Africa, specifically in the Congo, where I have like more connection. And yeah, I'm very happy about that. We still have a long way to go, though, but we're getting there.
No, I love that. You mentioned connecting with people in places in Africa, and David is in South Africa, and I want to ask you about what does pride look like in South Africa? Like what are, like, because in North America, we have a very specific view of what pride is, and a lot of the activism around what started pride has dwindled, and it's become really corporate, and it's become like really just about the celebration aspect of it. So I'm curious to know, does pride in South Africa look like pride in North America in terms of the commercialization of it and the consumerization of pride?
Thank you very much, Hollywood. I think I'm going to speak from the lens of being a migrant here in South Africa. When I came here in 2016, I mean, with all the Simon Nkoli and knowing a lot about how South Africa has moved ahead of the rest of the continent, I expected a very united front, a very big flag and all of that. But I find that having experienced pride, particularly in the Gauteng region, Gauteng province of South Africa, right now they're in racial clusters, right? There is, before the lockdown, there is the Centurion Pride, which is mostly white, but I think that's one I attend because I go to represent my department here, right? It's mostly white, it's gated, and you have to pay a fee to get in, right? And you get a tag or something on getting in, and there are gazebos and people sell stuff or give out stuff for free, depending. Then there is the Johannesburg Pride, which is more cosmopolitan. And there's the Soweto Pride, which is more Black on the outskirts of the middle of things. So it still gets in clusters. I'm not sure how it is in provinces like Cape Town, or Limpopo. And there are also parts of South Africa that are not open to coexistence, regardless of, the very progressive constitution. Yeah, so we still have pride like a fragmented bowl of conflict all over the place here.
I think what's really interesting, as a first generation Canadian, I was born in Canada, and my journey with coming out and experiencing pride was always super colorful and super bright. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I really started realizing that in all of this brightness and all of this, we're here and we're queer, there was very few people who looked like me who were part of the celebration aspect of it. Outside of a specific stage on a specific day, the representation of Black queerness, even in some place as multicultural as Toronto, was very limited as a young, in my early 20s. Like I went to specific places to see specific Black people. So Toronto's pride to me felt very similar. And then having toured and gone to pride in my 20s, I was like, I'm going to pride everywhere. I'm like, put me on the plane. I want to go see what it's like in New York. I want to go see what it's like in Miami. I want to go see what it's like in LA. And again, very Western world view of pride. So Maria, what I would like to ask you is, being from the Caribbean, which is predominantly Black, what does pride look like? Because we know there's a lot of homophobia that surrounds Caribbean culture, and like, what does pride look like in some place like St. Lucia? Oh, you're muted, love.
Pride in the Caribbean. Yes, thank you. Pride in the Caribbean is so diverse because the region is so diverse. We look at the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, we look at the French Caribbean, there's the English Caribbean as well as there's the Dutch Caribbean. So while we're just a line of islands that have been colonized by the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, and the English, we have a lot of similarities because a lot of the people who were enslaved were brought from the continent, Nigeria, South Africa, etc., Kenya, etc. So we do have a majority African descended population in the English-speaking Caribbean, for example. In Latin America, it might be different. So we kind of are grouped with the Americas, but we are islands with very distinct and different cultures and expression. And for the English-speaking Caribbean, unfortunately, we still have a lot of criminalization of LGBTQ plus people. So obviously there will be some restrictions on how Pride is celebrated and how people can express their sexual orientation and their gender identity if it's not considered normative, as it would. So across the region, it is extremely diverse. It's very different. Curacao, for example, Curacao hosts one of the oldest Pride celebration. Curacao is a Dutch island, and they hold one of the oldest Pride celebrations. But even in Curacao, there's still some discrimination. Suriname has Pride celebration that is that involves people at the highest level, in governments, including people who are on the island as representatives of other countries. But then we have the extreme of, for example, St. Lucia. St. Lucia's Pride celebration began very recently. That was just 2 years ago, and that it is still held in a way that is not very open. We had a very open Pride celebration. I mean, I'm here wearing two hats. One hat is 758 Pride, which is the St. Lucia Pride Committee. The other hat is as the communications and programs officer for the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, which is ECADE. And ECADE works across the Eastern Caribbean, across the small island Eastern Caribbean. So we have some experience across the state of islands. I also have some experience working with United and Strong, which is one of the sole LGBTQ plus organizations on the island of St. Lucia. So we have seen firsthand the discrimination, the fear that arises out of the criminalization of LGBTQ plus people, which still exists in the region. There has been a lot of, unfortunately, homicides of gay men in particular in St. Lucia. Other people who are non-binary or male-presenting females also face a lot of discrimination and violence. However, that has not stopped people from being proud of who they are and wanting to express that in some way, wanting to come out and let people know, I'm not ashamed of who I am. This is just part of how I was born, and you cannot discriminate against me because of that. So we have had Pride, we do have Pride at the moment. In Barbados, there's Barbados Pride, which is about, I think, 4 years old. That's one of the few countries where there is a Pride celebration in the Eastern Caribbean, apart from St. Lucia. Trinidad has a Pride celebration with with a group of organizations in Trinidad. Guyana, mostly led by SASOD, Guyana has Pride celebrations in Guyana. Barbados has Barbados Pride as well. So there are few among the several islands in the Caribbean region, some of which are dependencies. Cuba does have something, Dominican Republic, etc. Latin American countries do have some kind of celebration, but particularly from my perspective, in the English-speaking Caribbean, French Caribbean, not celebrating Pride is about making a statement that despite the law considering LGBTQ plus people to be criminals, we don't consider like LGBTQ plus people are criminals. And showing up to say, hey, you need to reconsider this. We are members of the community, and we are showing you that we are diverse from all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds, and showing how the discrimination can affect people from different backgrounds. Unfortunately, Pride is normally celebrated not openly, but again, the open Pride celebration is kind of very, I would say, very North American to some extent.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily follow that template. So the very first St. Lucia Pride was actually a health fair that was held in the middle of the main city of Castries in St. Lucia. And it was a health fair that brought in allies from different areas and kind of focused on positive aspects of LGBTQ plus people. And Barbados, for example, in Barbados, when they held the first Pride, there were quite a few threats. But in reality, when the Pride event, the Pride March was held, they held a march in Barbados. They've had it for several years. It was not, there was no outward exhibition of violence. In St. Croix, which is the United States Virgin Island, it's part of the United States where they don't have any laws that discriminate against or that legally identifies LGBTQ plus people as being illegal, or any laws that criminalize them. Still,
Right.
there's a lot of discrimination. When they held the Pride March, there were people literally in the streets threatening them. You could go to ECAD's Eastern Caribbean Alliance, you could go to our YouTube page, and you'll find some of the videos there where you see people literally in the streets while the Pride March is happening and are threatening people. However, the police force, of course, came out, because it's not illegal in St. Croix, came out to provide
Right.
protection. So it's just a range of experiences. But ultimately, each Caribbean island is trying to identify its own vision of what Pride is, and not just go along with what the more developed countries are doing and identify as Pride, and express themselves in a way that is more comfortable and more suitable to their environment.
I love that answer, because you brought up so many interesting points. Like, you talk about it's still considered illegal in some places to choose to love who you want to love. So how I just think it's an interesting concept, because we take for granted, as people who live in as someone who lives in the northern part of the world, that I can freely express how I want to express. I can freely be who I want to be, and not have to worry about being arrested for this act of just being my authentic self. So thank you for that. And I wanted to segue into asking David, if you could just give us a little bit more context about the work that you do, or that Pride Afrique does, in terms of being on the ground and being sort of like the voice for the people.
Thank you very much. Speaking for Pride Afrique, it's really it's a virtual space, right? It's not a formal organization. It's a virtual volunteer-driven space that started last year around March during the first lockdown, and it was really along the lines of striking a balance of Afro-queer stories on the continent. The founder, Kennedy Badmus, started with a Facebook group conversation involving me and a few others from the continent, where he said, look, there is so much positive happening, right? That is not getting as much spotlight as when something like Kakume or the homophobic mob attack happens. There's something that needs to be put forward as well. Let there be a balance of stories, not just because there needs to be a balance of stories, but because there's a child somewhere, there is a young person somewhere who is listening, who is watching the news, and I'm like, what is this what my future is going to be, right? Isn't it better to hide? But when we have affirmative, more positive narratives come around and say, look, there are people who are on the continent who are living and loving and doing very remarkable things. Persons like, Phil Opoku in the US, Lady Phil, and just Cameron, Kevin Mwachiro. There are so many positive examples, positive gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex role models on the continent. And that's what we said with last year, having these stories out along the lines of, our stories, our voices, our pride, trying to strike a balance with the three main languages, mostly along the colonial path: English, French, and Portuguese, and also archiving these stories. I think what sets Pride Africa apart is really the experience of becoming, which is really behind the scene, right? When we see people come out, it's really the final product. For instance, person like you, Hollywood, we don't know what happens behind, we don't know what the fireworks are. So it's really sharing this experience of becoming behind the scenes and co-creating with everyone else, right? International conversations, intergenerational conversations, and co-creating the experience that we see on the last day of Pride, which is usually in August. Yeah.
I think what's important about these conversations is that we are painting a more vivid picture for people about what the realities are around Pride. And one of the things that has become abundantly clear to me in the last year with the pandemic and the killing of Black bodies and trans bodies globally is that there's more conversations that need to be had about how we collectively can help. Because I've never been to South Africa, but I resonate with the narrative of there being a kid somewhere who might be questioning their orientation or who they are. And if all they're seeing is negative portrayals and people being murdered or persecuted or arrested or whatever the case is for being who they are, how do we change that? How do we move forward? How do we adjust people's lens and the landscape of what it looks like to be queer and to be proud of that? I'll open that to the floor if anybody wants to take it. I've been choosing, but I think if anybody wants to address this, I think because so much about what we're talking about is about solidarity and us coming together and uniting and helping to push positive narratives forward. Joelle, you unmuted yourself, so please go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to jump after what David just said, because yes, I was very happy last year to follow the African Pride and everything that was around it and the proposal, etc. And what I like is the fact that you know, we need to, and that's also answer your question. What do we need to do? You know, we need to change the narrative. And I mean, we all around this screen, or so I have to say screen or table, like we don't wait for things to happen, you know. You have to snatch it, you know, if you want it to happen. And what I can see around me, at least in Belgium, in France, and also in Kinshasa, is that we actually organize. Yes, when you go to the Pride, you can see that, okay, it's not very colored or not very diverse. And I'm talking as a Black lesbian, you know, my issues, let's say, stories are not told and not taken into account. But then what happened is that we do organize, you know, ourselves within the Pride, because yes, it's important to have something aside and to show that, okay, this is not going well for us, you know, you are not doing it right, or we are not represented. But sometimes we do it from inside and from outside. And in Brussels, for instance, when there was the Pride, we started by organizing a small collective that was called Wild Combination. And the Wild Combination just like combine all the Black and colored lesbian in Brussels during the Pride, organize an event in a specific location within the Rainbow Village. And slowly, the next edition, the organizer were like, okay, we like what you did. How can we make it bigger? How can we make it differently, you know? And the more we did that, the more sisters, brothers, others, you know, people of color were coming, and it grew and grew. And then after that, Mart Chilokamga was the coordinator of a festival, Massimadi, also launched the festival. So just that to say, it's about changing the narrative. It's about, okay, we are not going to ask for the space, we are going to take it, you know, that's one thing. And also as Fontenelle said, yes, there is a point of view, you know, there is also a way of the Pride happens in let's say Western countries, But if you go also in the Congo, in Kinshasa, for instance, you have this fantastic organization that is called Genialissime. It's mainly gay guys, but there's also lesbian, and they're really working hard to make it more diverse and inclusive with different genders, etc. And there's not a thing such as like Pride, but they do organize events and moments at the end of the year, like a end of the year party. And all of a sudden, you are there in the middle of Kinshasa, and you have this like incredible, colorful public audience or crowd. Yeah. I don't know how to say it. And yes, the way they did it is they took risk, of course, because it's not about saying, okay, it's all marvelous, but it's also, as David said before, we need also to show what is happening, what is positive, what is happening there. And those brothers and sisters took risk, and they making it, they doing it. And that allow us, it gives us strength, but moreover, it gives the youngster like hope for the future.
I love that. And I agree. I did an interview yesterday. There's this documentary that was made 2 years ago called Our Dance of Revolution. It was directed by this man named Philip Pike. And it's basically the telling of activism of the queer community in Toronto. And as somebody who lived in Toronto, I learned so much about people who I literally saw on a regular basis, but had no idea all of the work that they had done to carve out, like you said, Joelle, to no longer ask for space, but to take it. And just the fight that was, and what made me disheartened about it was, as a queer Black man who's an obviously active member of this community, I didn't find out about this documentary until I had to interview somebody about it. And I think it's important for us to have these conversations and to call these names. And I want to come to you, Carlos, really quickly and talk to you about Vérité Afrique and the work that you guys are doing and how you're continuing to push the narrative forward of taking up space.
Yeah. Thank you. Talking about the changing narrative, recently I've been thinking a lot about this word. We use that a lot in the activism work. And when we're using that work or when we're doing some work to improve people's lives, we always think, it has to happen, somewhere in the world, the impact of the work that I'm doing, if it's happening like somewhere at the end of the world, that's fine. But we don't try. It's very sad that we never succeeded in changing the narrative within our families, and that's where everything starts. And I've been thinking a lot about that because, I recently lost my mom. And in 2019, I came with my partner here. He's originally from Kenya. David was talking about Kevin Mashiro. He's my partner. And we came here, and it was such an important trip because I wanted to introduce him to my mom. My mom and I, when we sit, we talk a lot about a lot of things. Sometimes when I said, I have something to tell you, and she goes like, I know. I have something to tell you. And she goes like, I know. And she did the same thing when Kevin came here. But the good thing that I was really impressed about is that they were both sitting there. Kevin speak English. She speak, the mother tongue. She doesn't. They don't understand each other, but they kept looking at each other and smiling. And anytime when Kevin left, and anytime that he called me, and I connect them over the phone, and they're talking. As soon as she sees his face, and she was like, "Oh, Kevin." So I believe that we as activists, like a national or international activists around the world, we're doing all this work around the world, but we haven't changed the narrative within our family. And that makes me feel sad, It makes me feel sad. And I'm thinking like, how can we change this narrative? Like folks are being kicked out by the family. And when you look at the culture and tradition here in Africa, we're constantly talking about family, we're constantly talking about communities, but at the same families, and we work hard because we are like investment for our families. We do a lot of things to our families. We work very hard to help our families, but yet when someone, a member of the family notice that we are queer, we are the first one to be kicked out. And we haven't changed. Yeah, we haven't changed. We do so much. We sacrifice everything for our families, but we are the ones that they still kick out because we are queer. So how do we change the narrative within our families? When we're doing all those big things, our families are not aware of that. You know, how do we bring them so they can see that the people that they think that they think we are bad people because we just, you know, we're not living according to the culture or the tradition just because we have different sexual orientation and gender identity. They need to see us like in the work that we're doing, how we are so passionate and how we giving ourselves out there to change the world. But yet the first world where we were born, it's still not, you know,
it's not changed.
Not change. So we need to reflect on that. We need to find a way to do some work. When I said it's sad, it's sad because it's not easy. Like someone has such a high profile, you know, as an activist around the world, who is not recognized by their own family. It is sad, you know. There is a word in French where we say that on n'est pas prophète chez soi, which means that, you know, if you're a pastor or if you're a priest, you're not going to preach in your village or in your house and people will believe you. But if you preach outside of your family in your village, people will follow you. So that is a very sad thing because you still have this leadership. And coming back to what David said about Pride Afrique, last year I was involved and I learned so much, you know, just taking this conversation about like the queerness came from the Western world. But I learned so much through Pride Afrique that, you know, everything started here in Africa. And it's true, everything started here. And many tribes on the continent are still having, you know, this same-sex relationship. There is even some tribes where people having this same-sex relationship have the privilege of their tribe. Yet in those countries where those tribes existed, they're still criminalizing homosexuality because of religion, because of, you know, all the colonizations and all these, you know, things that we got from the Western world. So talking about changing the narrative, we need to bring that up. We need to use our own culture and tradition, you know, to challenge folks because they're using those culture and tradition to challenge us. We need to use the same culture and tradition to say that if you're using those culture and tradition to challenge me because I'm queer, then you don't know really your culture and tradition because all those queerness still existing in different tribes, you know. So that's the second thing. The third thing is talking about diversity and inclusion. You know, that's one of the big, you know, another big topic that we work on. And we're doing all those work, but yet within our own community, as rejected people, as stigmatized people, as marginalized people, it's a struggle for us to like implement or to make it a reality, the topic around diversity and inclusion. And I'm talking about that because we've been struggling, you know, to balance the language, you know, within the same space. I wasn't thinking of like creating something or being the co-founder of like a Fierté Afrique Francophone if since the last 20 years that I've been working in the community as an activist, if all the languages that we have, we could work using those languages without fearing that I'm not being understood, without, you know, struggling that, you know, because I've been colonized by French. If I'm working in Anglophone space, I'm not welcome because I'm not understanding what it's saying. I feel marginalized again. I feel double and triple marginalized, you know, in a space that I've been working hard, you know, with other folks to, you know, to make it safe, you know. So that's how slowly, Fierté Afrique Francophone came up. It's a work of 20 years of activism. The same way we've been working very hard to set up this international, the first LGBT Francophone organization called AGID that is set in Montreal. It's been a work of 20 years. So it's pretty much the same thing. When we're having the meeting the other day, I mentioned that Fierté Afrique Francophone came out of like a Pride Afrique. It literally came out of Pride Afrique because Pride Afrique was trying to respond in terms of diversity and inclusion in a virtual safe space. How can we come together as African, but being colonized by different, in different languages? How can we still come together and do and claim and be proud of our culture and tradition? And after Pride Afrique, Fierté Afrique Francophone came out. Folks, leaders from different French Francophone African countries asked me to do that. Let's do something and then let's use it to continue the advocacy work that we've been doing. So yeah, I'm going to stop here, but that's the reality, changing the narrative. What should that mean really at home? What should that mean for us as a, activism with high profile, high international profile?
I really love that sentiment because how you started it, I think, is a very important thing. I was reminded by a friend of mine, like again last year with the explosion of the race wars in America and in Canada as well. Like in the last couple of years, what I learned is in my own way, I was because I was like, I need to do more. I need to do more. I don't think I'm a frontline activist. I think my activism is done in a different way where I grew up in a Caribbean household. I have now my entire family loves me. Like there was a moment where they didn't, but my mom, my grandmother, my grandfather, all of my cousins, one of my cousins messaged me today on Instagram, was like, do you even love me? And I'm like, it's lovely because by showing up and being my fullest self, I was performing an act of activism because I was fitting myself into spaces where my kind and my sexual orientation wasn't accepted, wasn't welcomed. I did the same thing in my career as a dancer and as a choreographer. I constantly showed up in my fullness. I didn't suppress myself. And now when I'm working on set, I now will be on productions where 90% of the crew is queer. And before I was the 1%, So in doing that, I think that speaks directly to your point, Carlos. It's about starting to change the narrative here with yourself and your immediate circle, and then watch it expand and grow. Maria, you had unmuted yourself earlier. Is there something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. I did want to speak to documentation. I think that's extremely important. It's a little easier now that we are in the online space where you can set up a page, you can do a blog, etc. But of course, time is still a premium. So while you might have the facility, and not everybody also has the facility to go online to be able to have internet or Wi-Fi access or data. Not everybody has the facility in terms of being able to write, to record, etc. But wherever we can, wherever we have the time, we have the access, wherever we can document the struggle, document the advocacy, document the lives of people who are considered marginalized or who are considered criminal or criminalized in that sense. It's essential, I think, for us to do so. So I do want to just speak to the necessity of that. For example, in the region, we have an organization called Intersect ANU that in Antigua that does very good work with documenting just the stories of people, whether it be women who are marginalized or LGBTQ plus people. And I think that is something that every organization where possible, there was talk of a documentary earlier. If you can or have access to somebody who can do a documentary, who can do some research, it is so essential to have that history of LGBTQ plus people documented. Of course, on the continent, a lot of that has been lost because of colonization. But where history is available, it is so important for us to utilize, because in the region where there's so much Christianity, particularly Catholicism, that the narrative of LGBTQ plus people being unholy, basically,
Yes.
is what is predominant. So I think where we can counter that with actual histories of our people, and not just our people, but I think across the world, in every culture, there's history of LGBTQ plus people. I always tell people, if it's in the Bible, clearly because it was there before biblical times. So it's not like it's this huge thing now. And you know, and when you look at what is the harm, what is the harm that's caused by LGBTQ plus people? What's the harm, right? That
Right.
there's this need to criminalize people, that you really have to stop and take a look at it. But I think documentation is an essential aspect that we all have to, where possible, do as much as we can.
I completely agree, and I'm with the documentary that I just watched. I'm like, it's vital, because I spent all of my late teen years and 20s and the early part of my 30s oblivious to how much work has gone into carving out space for us to exist and be. And that's because there was no documentation of all of this work. And you also a couple of you have mentioned the colonization of us as people. And it got me thinking that Pride started off as activism. It started off as a protest. It started with, and I'm talking in North America, it started with rioting and people being fed up. And it sort of now feels like Pride, in a way, has been colonized by mainstream media and these big corporations that are coming in and maximizing off of our queerness. Like, even the recycling truck that drives through my neighborhood has a Pride flag on the side of the recycling truck. And 10 years ago, this was not something that existed. 20 years ago, completely unheard of. 30 years ago, you've got to be joking. So it's great to see the progress, but I want to talk about the core work that you're all doing to hold on to what feels like the core of what Pride is really about. It's about taking up space and creating a sense of community for those of us who have been marginalized and or excommunicated from the communities that we grew up in. If any of you want to tackle this monster of a statement that I'm making, I think it's like, I guess I should try to find a way to phrase it into a question. We'll use virtual Pride as an example. With Pride moving online, how do you think this has impacted all of your organizations and the reach that you've gotten? Like, we are all in 4 different places right now having this conversation virtually. So how has shifting Pride from those of you who've had it in person to an online space, how has that shifted your narrative and your direction and your approach to your Pride? I don't want to say celebration, but your Pride activism.
If I may go first.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. As opposed to shifting, right, the virtual nature of Pride actually birthed Pride of Freak, right? And some merits of the virtual access, right? Access and reach, particularly to people who would never express Pride in the past. We've had, last year we had like a vast number of partners, and this year as well. And one of the most remarkable things that happened last year was sharing archival material from the Canada Memory and Action Archives in Johannesburg, with the world, right? It's only something that is only accessible there in Japan, and I only got to know about in 2017 when I arrived. But last year, a young lesbian girl in Nigeria got to see Simon Nkoli, got to see Beb DC, got to see Justice Cameron, got to see love letters, and got to know about advancement very, very far away. I actually got to march virtually that she won't dream about, right? Or dream about. So really access to mentors, access to resources. And this changes the game completely. This is a step. This is a step higher and a step further for everyone. Without the pandemic, I don't think there would have ever been a pride experience for most Nigerians that cannot leave Nigeria or other parts of the continent. So I think it's really a plus. Yeah.
Yes. Maria, I believe you guys have had like Pride in person. Yes.
Yes.
What has the response been like with it shifting to an online platform?
It's been mixed because we've been lucky enough. Initially, the numbers of people with COVID-19 the number was low. So we were able to gather with a limited, as you can imagine, the number is limited, right? It's not going to be a small island. So we were able to meet within the restrictions and have Pride in person. We also held online events in St. Lucia, and we had Monet Exchange, who is a St. Lucian. Personality from St. Lucia, but residing in the US and part of RuPaul's Drag Race, was able to come and be part of it virtually. So we met in person and we celebrated Pride in person, but we were able to host Monet Exchange, who is based in the US, part of RuPaul's Drag Race, and St. Lucian was able to be part of that celebration, come on live. I mean, she came in with her Lucian colors on her and everything. So it's been mixed and it's been fantastic. I was able to be part of Barbados Pride and be part of the Barbados Pride panel. Pride in St. Croix, for example, we able to join in on some of the activities. Sassford had a film festival, which they had this year as well. Sassford, Guyana Pride is still ongoing. So we were able to join that because it's online. So the online space has allowed us to connect in a way that was not as possible before, because we were able to travel. The Caribbean islands are close, although the the traffic in between is kind of difficult. Most of our flights have to go through the US to come to a Caribbean island, which is insane. But it is what it is. Already commercial. Yeah, capitalism. It's what it is. The online space has allowed us to be able to connect across the several small islands, but also because we've had low numbers of COVID-19 infections, we've also been able to still have meetings in person. So it's expanded, but it's also kept that spirit of community within the region, the small islands.
We love to hear that, because I'm telling you, like Pride last year in Toronto was like, this is what we're doing. We're gonna sit in my backyard and watch this on a sheet. Okay, cool. But I agree. I think it's created a much wider reach than we probably would have had. Like I had in my mind's eye, I never imagined that St. Lucia had Pride. I just assumed that the homophobia was running rampant, and I have no desire to go somewhere where I'm going to be persecuted for the shorts that I have on. Do you know what I mean?
I totally understand. And again, you have to separate the narrative that comes from people who visit the island as opposed to a narrative of people who live on the island. And there is criminalization, there is difficulty, there are threats. It's very real. There is very real danger. One thing that you can never get rid of is people's desire to be themselves and to live their lives and find happiness regardless of being criminalized. So while it may be more on the ground and less overt than in other places, in the Caribbean, despite all this narrative of the most homophobic countries in the world, etc., and I'm sure some of the people from the continent can speak to that as well. There is one narrative of people who are criminalized. There is danger. There are threats. There are homicides and violence against LGBTQ plus people. However, concurrently, there are people living their lives, finding joy, celebrating, loving, just being part of community, regardless, because that is just an integral part of us as human beings. And we find make space to do that. And that's happening in our own way, in the small island Caribbean, in the larger islands as well, some other continents like Suriname, etc. People will find a way, and as you say, love will find a way, right?
Yes, I love that. Joelle, I want to also ask you the same thing. How has virtual pride impacted the reach of the work that you're doing?
Well, I have to say on the first place, I was like, okay, this thing's gonna be like online. I'm not very, very happy, but not really this year, but let's say the last year after the first lockdown, we in Belgium we organized there's the day of the Pride, like with the party on the street, etc. But we really start very early, and the 26th of April is the Lesbian International Day, So we organize from 10 to 10 event online. So I'm starting with a conference the day before, and then on a Sunday from 10 to 10, like parties with lesbian from like everywhere in Europe and Central Asia. And I have to say, it was really a moment. I felt like I didn't miss the streets, I didn't miss like being outside, and it was really a warm day, and it was really an incredible moment. And we all know how important it is to feel that you're not alone in a way, and those moments when you dance together, when you talk together, when you discuss, etc., and physically with each other, you feel the bond, it's important. But there, only with my screen, it was really, I have to say, a very important moment where I realized also that yes, you can still do things, you don't have to be, because of the pandemic, you can still reach out so many, even more lesbian around the world. And it was really interesting because I was skeptical, I have to say, thinking, okay, how this thing is going to happen. Of course, you always, of course, people who are left aside because there probably is only one computer, you cannot share the computer, maybe you're not out in your family, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, like a party that was supposed to be like for those 10 to 10 hours, and it ended in midnight. We had like women from like in Belgium, in France, in Kiev, in Turkey, it was like completely incredible. And seeing on the screen like this girl in Florida waking up when you are going to bed, so you can see the sun rising on the background on one screen, and then you are in the like, okay, and that was only on that one day. And then of course all the other events that happened, we were very, very, very active because we all got touched in very different ways by the pandemic, and it actually gave me like the desire to keep up on that work. And now that we are sort of getting back into normal, I like the implication, the virtual implication seems to be and has to be as much important as the physical one, in a way, because then you can touch even more people.
Yes. Honestly, I cannot thank you all enough. Like I really wish that we could go further and continue to talk, but we've run out of time. Some of the notes that I was taking while I was listening to everybody speak, and if there's anything you want to chime in with, like one quick little final thing, you can. But changing the narrative at home, taking space, not asking for it, activism being personal and local, not necessarily this huge global thing. Like the change literally starts here, and documentation. These are 4 points that I really took away from the conversation today. And I think if we can all commit to taking some of these things to heart, it'll change how people perceive pride, how we move forward, how we collectively continue to change the narrative. I thank you all so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you all for your time. I know it's early and or late for some of you. I appreciate it. I thank you all. You can unmute yourself but thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Hollywood. This was really great. Thank you. Thank you all.
I appreciated all the comments from everybody else. It was so good. I mean, again, that phrase that when Joel said that, I was just like, you got to create space, you got to make the space. You can't wait for people to give you the space, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we're all here.
Yeah.
It was lovely seeing all those beautiful faces.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
We can get together again one day and hug each other. Maria, I so miss your hug.
Well, thank you all for tuning in.
And David, I hope to meet you one day.
Very soon.
Yes, thank you all for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you took something away from this conversation. Those of you who are listening, Pride Toronto, I thank you so much. Thank you. And once again, shout out to, Dignity Network Canada and our sponsors for putting this together. Be well, everybody. Spread love.